Lights Out, Chapter 10. Part 2. I don't know how many I'm going to do, but it'll be more than 3, maybe 5. Todd took them outside to the garden. It was over an acre in size. Only a small portion of it was planted, and Todd told them that they would be planting all of it with fall crops as soon as it cooled off just a little. They had chickens, rabbits, and 2 milk cows in the barn. There was a lot of hay and a medium-sized John Deere tractor stored in the barn as well. Todd told them that they had about 100 head of beef cattle on the ranch too. He explained that their goal was to produce everything they needed and not have to deplete their stored food. He explained that everyone had several jobs. Most everyone had one primary job and then helped out in 2 or 3 other areas. He told them that even the small children had to help with some things, like feeding the livestock, gathering eggs, and milking the cows. Mark noticed that Sam wrinkled her nose at the last one. Next, Todd took them by the clinic where they met Dr. Sullivan. He was Susie the worrywart's husband. Lisa was very impressed with how well equipped and stocked the clinic was. Then they went to the laundry. There were several commercial washers and gas dryers. Jim asked how they were powered, and Todd told him that they had several generators. The biggest was a diesel-powered 30,000-watt diesel. They also had a couple of smaller generators, 1 diesel and 1 propane. They had lots of diesel fuel stored in an underground tank, and there were separate buried 1,000-gallon propane tanks for each of the cabins and more for the kitchen and laundry. Estimates were that there was enough fuel for 3 years without any resupply. He told them each family was assigned one of the washers 1 day a week and that they hung the clothes to dry unless the weather would permit it. The next building they visited was the combination library and school. There were several small classrooms and a modest library. Todd told them that they had school books for all grades and subjects and that they would start teaching school in a few days. For now, they were giving everyone a chance to settle in. They already had 2 teachers. One was an English major and the other was a math major. He told Jess they were really looking forward to having her for the science class. The last building in the complex was a combination garage and armory. The garage was huge, and they had a couple of new Jeeps and about a dozen Polaris ATVs inside. David was very taken with the ATVs. Todd said they would take some out to look over the ranch, but since it was so close to dinner time, they would have to wait until tomorrow morning. There were tools, mechanic and carpentry, air compressors, welders, and much more in the shop. On one end, there were stacks of lumber reaching almost to the ceiling. Along one wall, there were parts bins filled with many things you'd find at a hardware store or auto supply store. The other end of the building held the armory. The racks held a number of battle rifles Mr. Davis had bought in the event that they needed to defend the ranch. There were even 2 Barrett M82A1s. Jim whistled when he saw the Barretts. He'd always wanted a 50 BMG rifle but couldn't afford it. "You like the big boy toys?" Todd asked him. "Man, those are sweet, Todd." "We also have a reloading room over there. We can reload most of the major calibers in handgun and rifle, and we have 12 and 20 gauge shotgun reloaders." Todd pointed to a door, and then the men looked at the equipment. Mark had never reloaded, but Jim had, and Mark had looked at some of the catalogs that were on Jim's reloading bench. He noticed that the presses were all high-dollar Dillons. When they finished looking the armory over, Todd asked the women and children if they'd like to go back to their cabins and get cleaned up for dinner, while he took the men to meet Mr. Davis. They agreed, although Jess and Lisa didn't seem to like being dismissed. When everyone else left, the men started walking toward Mr. Davis's cabin. "Hey, Mark, I bet one of those 50s wouldn't have felt like a pea shooter when those 3 dirtbags attacked you," Jim observed. "You're right about that." "What are you talking about?" Todd asked. The 2 friends filled Todd in about Mark's encounter with the grocery store. Mark gave the bare facts. Jim filled in the juicier parts. Todd was very impressed by the story. When they got to the leader's cabin, Mark noticed that it was significantly bigger than the others. Todd knocked on the door, and an older woman answered it. "Yes, Todd," she said. "Hi, Millie. I have Mark Turner and Jim Davis here. He wanted to meet them." "Of course, please follow me." The 3 men followed the woman into a large sitting room. She then disappeared. "Is that Mrs. Davis?" Mark asked. Todd chuckled. No, Mr. Davis isn't married. That's his personal assistant, Millie. A moment later, a man came into the room. He was about 5'7" or 8", trim and bald. He held out his hand to Jim and introduced himself. "Nice to meet you, Reginald Davis," he said. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Davis. I'm Jim Davis. Have any relatives from Pennsylvania?" "No, as far back as I know, we're all from Texas." "Well, then I guess we're not related," the gentleman said with a smile. The man turned his attention to Mark and reached his hand out. "You must be Mark Turner." "Yes, sir, Mr. Davis," Mark said while shaking his hand. "It's so nice to meet you." "The pleasure is all mine. I've heard a lot of good things about each of you. Please, gentlemen, have a seat. I assume Todd has shown you around." "I showed them around the complex. We're going to look at the ranch in the morning."